have seen the worst, and there is nothing left for me to hate, so I can lay me down, my brothers, on the ground. I bled today until Coyote comes to raise me up and carries me
Oh, I don't know what's happened there. We've still got a picture over our faces. How exciting. I don't know what we've done there. There we are. Hey. Hello. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Scottish Rugby podcast brought to you by the Scottish Rugby blog. I am Cammy Black. Joining me this evening, I've got John Anderson. Hello, John. And we've also got Al Kerr. First appearance back since the big
club dinner. Six Nations are back, so that's that's my cue to step in from the wings.
We've wheeled you out.
Indeed.
You can visit the blog scottishrugbyblog.co.uk for coverage of the Six Nations, strange as it is, that we're talking about this in October. We've also got some player reviews from the weekend. We've got a report that Gav Harper's done on the women's game, and also a match report on the men's game against Georgia. We have lots coming up as well in the to cover the rest of the matches on there. You can also sign up for our Patreon if you want to support the podcast for £3 or £5 a month. If you pay £5 a month, we'll read your name out on the podcast. We've not had anybody sign up for £5 a month this week. We've had a couple of new £3 subscribers, so thank you to them. We had someone sign up in dollars, but I think when I did the exchange rate one, I had to work out whether he'd signed up for £3 or £5. So he's somewhere in the middle. So I don't know where we are with the exchange rate as things stand at the minute, but apologies if you are.
It's good to say. Good to know Donald Trump's sinking his campaign funds into important sort of media channels.
I was a bit worried. Yeah, I did. I was mildly worried that was what was happening. It was some sort of tax fiddle. Donald Trump. You can pay above the £5 as well. So if he wants to siphon some funds our way for campaign funds to hide them, we'll gladly look after them and have them resting in our account.
He'll be a Scottish rugby fan, though, right? He's half Scottish.
Well, he is, isn't he? He's is it Bute or Mull?
I think it's the Western Isles, is it not? It's not Bute. Is it not Lewis? His mum was from.
Very, very possibly. So, yeah, if you're listening, Donald, we're open for sponsorship. And speaking of sponsorship, we've partnered. How are they called? Partnered. But some guys have asked us to push some gin anyway. There's a group of guys who are crossing the Northwest Passage. So that's a 2,000-meter Arctic route between the Atlantic and the Pacific Ocean. And they're going to row it because the ice is melting so quickly up there, you can now do that. So they're doing that to raise some awareness of the fact that the ice is melting. There's a Scottish guy involved who's got in touch with us. And if you want to, they're selling some gin, Northwest Passage gin, which has water from Orkney, because apparently that's where the old Northwest Passage boats used to go from. So there's a link on the podcast page, and if you want to buy a bottle of gin, we get a kickback, we get a bit of money out of it. So if you want to buy some gin for someone for Christmas, then go to the blog, go to the podcast page and click on the link. So we've also got some very exciting partnership news coming up. I won't say anything about it until it's absolutely confirmed, but we are very excited about I feel like we're the right fit for it, John.
Oh, definitely, yes. This is like if you were to go into a marketing company and say, right, I need people to market this product, our podcast, our group of hardy Scottish rugby fans would be the only choice.
I should say we're live as always on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter. Ian Hayes asking if we need a product review of the gin.
I just want to know: can you put ice in this gin, or would that be completely against the entire the point of the gin? Right?
I guess your freeze is contributing to the reason why the Northwest Passage is passable.
Yeah, it just feels like ice when you're lamenting the fact there is no ice. It seems counterintuitive.
Yeah, Martin Dell's asking if we're being sponsored by a mail order razor. Oh, Martin, just you wish. Just you wait and see who we are partnering with. As I said, we're live anyway this evening, and if you want to find out how to watch us live in future, you can go to the podcast page on the blog, and you'll get all the details of our channels there. If you're watching live this evening, get involved in the comments. If we like your comments, and we think they're readable out, if we can read them out, we will do if they are printable. This is a family-orientated podcast. We'll start off. We've got one from Andrew Lone, regular listener and viewer of the podcast. He says, good win for the men's and a good effort by the women last weekend for a draw. Now, I like to start with the women's game. 13, we should start off, John. Last week, I and Rory said, won't it be great if they keep to within 20 points of France? And you just want to get the little wins on the pitch, win the odd scrum, win the odd breakdown. We should start with an apology. But looking back at form, that was an unexpected result.
Yeah, absolutely was. And again, it just goes to show how thankless a task being a predictor of these outcomes is in sport, isn't it? But yeah, it was a great result, and obviously when we saw it come through, we had all kind of. This was not one of those situations where I was more than happy to be wrong, which it doesn't happen often. I really like being right, but in this instance, I was very, very happy to be wrong. It was a cracking result.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think we said last week, the French players are all pro or semi-pro, and they'd all been playing since September, which makes it all the more remarkable that I think a few members of the team are in the Premier 15s, but the rest are all players who haven't played since before lockdown.
Absolutely. It's a real shot in the arm for the women's game up here, and it's great to see. It was on BBC Alba, I think, and I was listening, and like yourselves, I wouldn't have stuck. I certainly wouldn't have stuck my last fiver on Scotland getting anything, Scotland's women getting anything out of that game beforehand. And even at half time, I happened to catch a wee bit on the radio, and I can't remember who it was. It was on Peter Wright, I think it was. He was saying, it was 8-3 then, I think, at half time, and he was saying, well, that's great, this good first half, but last 20 minutes they'll drop off, and that I think has been the way for so many of these games. They've been relatively tight. I think the women have managed to keep into to a degree for the first 60 minutes, and then that level of professionalism I think does tell, right? But to see them actually score late on, get that draw against a really strong French side that are gunning for the title, I think it's a real shot in the arm for the game up here. And the more exposure it gets breeds success, success begets success. So I think it's fantastic, and I think they deserve every credit that's coming their way. And the challenge now is to back that up, in the remaining games and kick on from here, and hopefully then take that into the Six Nations, next year.
Yeah, there's a lot of people, John, online, and you see it because they've been picking up results here and there over the last few years. Scotland, they beat Ireland a couple of years ago. They've pushed a couple of teams close. There's more and more people taking notice, saying, what a great performance, what great players we have. And so that interest is picking up. And there've been good crowds at Scotstoun before lockdown. So it's growing. Yeah,
I think that's fair. Certainly it's getting... I think credit to the SRU as well. They're marketing it well. They're making sure that they're not looking to profit from any success that the women's game's having. They're making sure that they're making it accessible. You get tickets through. If you've got a season pass, you get tickets to the women's internationals as well. So they are making it possible for people to go along. I think it's really good actually as well, having obviously having it at a place like Scotstoun, where just it is smaller, you can create a bit of atmosphere and make it a good day out for people. So, credit to the SRU for that, and it's certainly getting more interest now, and you're seeing people talking about it a lot more online.
Yeah, I mean, the game itself, John, you caught this, did you?
Yeah, I did. Yep.
So I mean, the defense, I was particularly impressed with the defense, and actually, as Al said, the fact they've dropped off maybe in the last 20 is the professionalism of the other sides comes through, but that didn't happen, and all the line speed, they really caused France a lot of problems and called that. I mean, I think it was something like there'd been one Scottish error in the first half, I think, and about eight errors by the French team, which just goes to show the pressure they were putting them under.
Yeah, I think what struck me most about it was that they showed the benefit of doing the basics really, really well, and they done it with an intensity that they kept up throughout, and that's a blueprint for all teams. We should every team should be looking at it and thinking, do the basics well, do them fast, and put the opposition under pressure, and you'll always have a shot at a result. You'll always cause teams problems, whether they've got all the World Cup winning stars, or they've got internationals who've got 100 caps under their belt. It doesn't matter. If you put them under pressure, they're going to make mistakes. And it was one of those games. Scotland just, they didn't make those mistakes as well, which is really good. And I just really, really impressed.
I mean, and that decision at the end, I mean, I don't think we would have seen a men's team kick it out at 13-all. So I mean, that to have a cool head at 13-all and the clock go dead and say, do you know what, we've done enough here. Nobody would have expected us to get that result. This is something to build on. Let's just kick it off, get off the park, and celebrate this as an achievement, rather than trying to push a result.
And then pressing the gamble button, which traditionally, and we all know we're Scottish, that the gamble button is not our friend, right, folks? We've been here before many times. So yeah, I think it does show a really sort of level of self-awareness of where you are, where we are in the game, where we are. And I think it goes back to the point, I think, John, that you're making, a team that can be disciplined and accurate in what it does can go an awful long way, and it can cover an awful lot of sins in terms of, maybe not having the same level of skills, and maybe not even having the fitness, because actually part of that fitness strain is coming from a lack of accuracy. You're having to expend more effort. So the more accurate they get, the more precise they're getting, you actually are able to bridge some of that gap to the professional players, because you're utilizing less energy throughout a game, right? So I think I think there's a lot for them to build on. I think there's a lot of really positive signs. I think even in some of the other earlier games in the tournament, they've maybe been, I know they got a bit of a hounding off of England, but if you look at where England are probably 10, 15 years ahead of the women's game, right? And I think that has to be taken into account. So the challenge is now is to push that on. And I think what's really good is I know my old club side, Broughton, they've got a really strong women's side. So if you look, down at the grassroots, there is some really good stuff going on in the women's game down there. Some really competitive sides floating around. Say my old club, the men's side, bless us, when we weren't particularly great. We had our moments, and they've got better since I left. You can draw your own conclusions from that. But the women's side was always strong. And, I think they do an awful lot in terms of attracting new players into the game. And I think there's a real there's an opportunity for stars to come through that grassroots game in the women's space in the way that it just isn't there, in the men's space. And I think there's a lot to be harnessed in there.
Yeah, I think there was, because you'd get, I think you can play as a girl, you can play up to a certain age group with the boys, and then it separates. And for a lot of clubs, they would have a strong female representation up to the age group where it splits. And then where do you go as a girl? Some up until a few years ago in Berwick, for example, you're having to travel into the borders or down into Northumberland to try and find a youth team that for girls rugby. But now, as you say, Al, that there are teams coming together, and the SRU have done a job in supporting that, I guess. And not just them, but I suppose the clubs, that there are people willing to give up the time to coach and to spend the time doing that, which is a good sign. I think in terms of, there was a lot of kind of intelligence used, which the men don't always display, John. Particularly, even kind of the adaptability early on, they were getting pinged for offside quite a lot, but as the game wore on, they weren't getting pinged for it so much. So that ability to adapt was really impressive as well, because particularly where, we'll maybe talk about it with Georgia a little bit later on, where you are an emerging nation, which, let's face it, Scotland are from the women's game.
Yep.
You will, you just keep making the same mistakes because you're under pressure, but they adapted and they changed it so that they weren't getting pinged for it as the game wore on.
Yeah, and that's another really encouraging sign. Being able to, it's so easy. We've all played in teams where you're maybe, you're an underdog and you're taking a bit of a pasting, and you, as you rightly say, you make errors, and you compound those errors by making errors on top of errors, and being able to adjust and being able to have a cool head and say, do you know what, right, well, we're not getting this right just now, but let's just change something and let's try something different and get it right. I think there's almost an element of, maybe in the men's game at the highest level, there's almost a desire to coach that out of players. And, we famously saw that back with Mr. Haskell and the Italy game with, is it a ruck, sir? Just wanted to bring that up. But yeah, showing an awareness of what the referee's looking for. I mean, again, what we're talking about here is a fundamental. It's like a basic thing, but so many teams don't do it well. And to see a Scottish team doing it with ease almost was really heartening.
Yeah, I mean, essentially what we're saying here is the Scotland women are more intelligent than Scottish men, but that,
yes.
I think,
that was a given, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yes. 3 prime examples in this podcast.
Right, to see, looking at current. Yeah.
If you're listening to the audio podcast, you're going to hear from Brian Eason and Helen Nelson now about how the game went. We were going to try and get the clips ready for the video podcast, but I've hit a technical snag. But if you listen to the audio version of the podcast, you can hear from Brian Eason and Helen Nelson are out now. I mean, there's a real chance now, I think, for Scotland, because they're going to Wales next, and Wales haven't had a great Six Nations. Probably from the women's point of view, they're probably in the same place as Scotland, I think. Maybe have been better in the past, but there is an opportunity, I think, to go down to Wales and to not to finish bottom of the pile this time round. And they've still got Italy to play as well. Yeah. Let's not forget that, which was the game that was called off. But there's an opportunity here, I think, for a mid-table finish, which when we talk about mid-table finishes for Scottish national teams, that's a good finish by any measure, Al.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think that if they could, even if they squeeze another victory out of those two, then it's, or not another victory, but they get a victory out of that to build on what they've done against France. I mean, let's not, it's difficult to forget, but I mean, France are, a big heavyweight when it comes to the women's game. I mean, they're not. We've turned over Ireland before. I think there's a chance here against Italy and Wales. But I mean, France are up there. They were looking at really, battling England for this. And we've already said England are that far ahead. So I do think there's an opportunity for them in the next 2 games. It would be a fantastic achievement. And what an amazing start to the new coaches. Brian Eason, did you say?
Yeah.
What an amazing start. He's come in, obviously the previous coach had left because they were unwell. So he's come in, if he could come in with a draw against France and then, a victory or even another draw, to be honest, out of that, I think then that's a really solid foundation for them to start kicking on. And that confidence you hope would then build going into, and the Six Nations are coming around really quickly again. So you're not waiting months and months and months for the next round of fixtures. And there's a World Cup next year. So,
which Scotland have to qualify. I think we've got Spain to play as part of the qualification, and I think the game against Italy counts as well. From memory, it's not a straightforward qualification process by any means, but it's achievable now all of a sudden, and it hasn't been in the past, John.
No, I think that again, that's absolutely fair, and what a great achievement it would be for them to reach the World Cup. And again, you saw maybe the benefit from football with the women's World Cup recently, and the Scottish team playing at that, and the interest that got in the press, and that does feed through. If people are covering these games, then it feeds through to the grassroots, and you've got someone all of a sudden saying, "Do you know what? I'm going to go and play some rugby. And right, to bring it looped nicely back, we've now got clubs popping up everywhere that these girls can go and pick up a ball and go, do you know what, I'm going to go down to my local club and I'm going to play a bit of rugby up to senior level now, which is, it's great. And I credit to everyone who's involved in getting that off the ground properly, and long may that continue.
Yeah. We'll move on then. The next one we've got, obviously, Scotland men against Georgia at the weekend. It's a bit, I think it was always a foregone conclusion. I guess what did we learn apart from the fact that we can maul weak teams repeatedly?
I love the fact that you say it was a foregone conclusion. And nothing was a foregone conclusion, Cammy.
There's the progress we've made as a nation at rugby. Is now we don't have to worry too much about
beating Georgia. Yeah, people are not necessarily saying we need to get relegated to let Georgia in, right? I think we'll probably put that argument to bed for a couple of years at least. I mean, I'm sure that will rear its head again. Look, it was a very professional display. By and large, 8 tries, and that is the most tries we've scored against Georgia in any of the games. So that's not to be sniffed at. It was a nice mix of backs and forwards. I think there was a sharpness. I think they actually started really well. They looked like they were trying to. I thought they came out the blocks really quickly, which is good to see because we're not traditionally the quickest starters in games. Is it a surprise that then after about 10-15 minutes it tailed off and the rest of the first half was a bit of a slog? Probably not. The guys have not played with each other for 6-7 months, so I think there was a bit of bedding in. I think the guys, Manfully, biggest uptick for me is Finn coming back though, because as soon as he came onto that park, you see what that brings, what he brings to the pace of the game, the incisiveness of the game. I think there was a lot to be excited of when you actually saw him coming in, because it was like a 90% done jigsaw, and then the last bit just slotted in and everything flowed. Somebody put oil in the engine and it was running a lot smoother.
Put some high octane fuel in there.
A tiger who came to tea in the tank.
Indeed.
It's interesting. I mean, Adam Hastings has taken a bit of a pasting this week on the kind of forums and social media,
yep.
John, and he's not. I think you've said he's not had the best of starts to the season. There was an element of that, and definitely, he didn't bring his kicking boots, did he, to Murrayfield? No. But I wonder how much of this is, and we've talked about this in the past, particularly with scrum halves, where we've said, well, why it's always the scrum half that comes on and plays the last 20 that we want to start, because we go, well, they're coming on, they play much quicker.
Yep.
But there is an element to that, well, that's the game plan in the last 20 because the game's breaking up, so you want to increase the tempo. I'm not saying that Adam Hastings didn't have, had an amazing game by any stretch, but and Finn Russell is Finn Russell, and he's a level, if not 5, 10, 15 levels above. But I think there is an element of Hastings was playing a different game plan to the game plan that Finn Russell was then sent on to play. So is he being judged harshly?
I take that point. That he does. There would have been a different game plan in the first half. I think the issue you have is that he didn't necessarily execute that game plan as well as he could have. There was a few moments where, so obviously I've watched a lot of Adam Hastings over the last few years, and I think he's a fantastic player, particularly at club level. I think for Glasgow he does a great job. His running game in particular is very exciting, but I think at international level he's still relying on that running game to maybe try and get himself out of trouble, and international defences don't give you that time to maybe find a weak shoulder and sneak through. And he puts himself in trouble more often than he should at international level. And there's maybe an element of just, he's got quite a few caps now, but there's an element of bedding in still that's happening. But I think we really need to caveat this with he's 24, right? And I think lots of people have said online, look at Johnny Sexton at 24. They got, heir apparent to the greatest player in Irish history. He certainly was not at 24. He was utter mince at 24. Adam Hastings is quite far along in his development. The fact that he's kind of surpassed, let's be honest, right? He's a better player than Duncan Weir. He's a better option at 10 than a lot of people that have come before him. he's still settling into that role at international level. If stuff hadn't happened in the Six Nations previously, he wouldn't have started that Six Nations. Finn would have started the Six Nations, and Hastings would have been doing 20 minutes, 10 minutes off the bench, 20 minutes off the bench, building his international exposure. Is he ready to start games at international level? Probably not, but that's where we find ourselves. He is the second best 10 we have at the moment.
Yeah, and I suppose it must be hard because you're going on the pitch against a team like Georgia, and you've come off the back of starting against Russia, where you've run in. You know, did you run in? Did he? He didn't get a hat trick. Did he get a couple of tries that day against Russia? Two tries in the World Cup, and you know, they were cutting Russia to bits. So there must have been an element of going on the pitch and kind of expecting that might happen again against an opposition like Georgia, and you maybe needed a cooler head and a bit more maturity.
Possibly, but I'd like to think that he should understand that Georgia are a far tougher prospect than Russia, right? There are about 2 levels between those two sides. I mean, for all of Georgia's frailties, they're still a pretty robust unit, and they've got enough experience at international level, which Russia don't have. I mean, I think the challenge. I would probably one of those people who are critical of Hastings, and I've never been a big Hastings fan, and I'll be completely honest about that. However, I actually thought he was having a really good Six Nations, so I remember having the conversation with others, earlier this year, and saying, he looked like he'd actually come on a level, and actually his decision making was better. His decisions of when to kick, his kick execution was better, from hand. His choice of when to attack and the lines he was attacking were far better. And I actually thought he guided Scotland really well. You think back to the France game, for example, and he helped make sure that we utilised the extra man in that game. So I thought he'd come on, and so partly I'm disappointed because it felt like a real regression in that Georgia game, because his decision making, there's no doubting he's got the talents. And he will be, to your point, John, I think he will be a very, very good player at an international level in due course. But I'd hope to see him that level of performance. Now, look, everyone was rusty, so that has to be taken into account. People have not played for months. I know the back at club game, etc. But it would have been really nice. I think he's still got a wee bit of way to go. But, he will get the opportunities, but he may be playing second fiddle for a while, I would suggest, certainly in 10.
I suppose to a certain extent as well, during the Six Nations, he had his Glasgow 9 and his Glasgow 12 outside of him, either side of him for those games. And he's been thrown on with James Lang at 12, who, had a very solid game. I don't think I didn't think, he is a new 12, starting 12 or anything, but I thought he is a reasonable option that you could use, and he's young as well. But I wonder how much, Finn Russell is probably more adaptable, John, in being able to come on and play with whoever's outside of him because of the way he plays. I mean, the question is whether or not those people either side of him can play with Finn Russell rather than having to play with them.
I think there's an element of that. I mean, the flexibility is one thing. I think we talked previously about Finn Russell having Laidlaw to kind of coach him through games as well, and his kind of early, even middling international career. And I do think Hastings, with Lang outside him, there's almost a pressure on Hastings to he's the more experienced campaigner, so there's almost like he's needing to coach the guy outside him as well. I didn't think Ali Price necessarily gave Hastings much to work with either, which it just makes it a bit harder. But I think it was very noticeable, like you said about Finn Russell coming on the park and kind of, it being the biggest point of the game, really. And it was noticeable. Everyone just seemed to relax. Even Adam Hastings, who to that point looked quite tense and quite upset about things almost. He just, it cut to them. I think there was a stoppage when Finn came on and they were cracking a joke and laughing and just obviously having a giggle about something, and everybody just seemed to chill, just relax. So it's Finn time. Okay, we'll just let's. I mean, it was the most chilled Cats at the Rave I've seen in a while.
Yeah. I mean, the other one we've got again. If you're listening on the audio podcast, you'll get a wee clip of an interview with Darcy Graham now, where he's talking about playing with Duhan van der Merwe. He went well, I thought, Duhan. Al, I was quite.
Mhm.
He talked about being nervous afterwards, and he said himself, that he felt he struggled because of how, obviously the Georgians stuck about 4 guys on him. But despite that, to have 4 guys stuck on you, I thought he still did well to kind of stay in touch and to recycle the ball. So that's impressive, because I mean, Wales are going to mark him, probably not to that extent.
Mhm.
They're not going to be able to mark him to that extent, but I thought he did pretty well given how tough the Georgians can be physically.
Yeah, I mean, like I struggle to see him not being in that shirt going forward, right? So I think he did enough. He, I think Rory said in his actually his player ratings, they were quadruple teaming him, the Georgians at some points, to be able to stop him. I think what really worked for him was a couple of things. One, he got his hands on the ball early, right? He never really got a chance to get up a real head of steam. And every time he was getting the ball, he was tight up to the wing. But he was always coming back in. He was always pulling defenders into himself. So he was, sucking in 2 or 3 Georgian sort of defenders at any one time, which invariably creates space and pressure elsewhere on the park. And then what I thought was really pleasing, because the game wasn't necessarily coming to him, he went looking for work. He went looking to get busy. He was joining the back of some of those rolling mauls. He was really throwing himself in. And if you think about it, where did he score his try? He was a long way in off his wing, taking that ball off of Finn, right? So, he may not have felt super confident, but it didn't look like that to the observer watching from afar, as we all were, unfortunately. So yeah, I think he's got a lot. I think he'll only get better. And God help the team that give him 5 yards of a start to actually get ahead of steam up, because I think at international level he will still be as destructive as he is at club side, just because of his size and his pace. And he's a wee bit like the direct comparison would be when Visser came in. Visser came in, he had a similar sort of, scoring record. If I think Visser scored 2 tries against New Zealand on his debut,
Yeah, he did,
we got beat, so I mean, it was like, crikey, he was a good player. The Visser's problem was always defensively, and I know that Van der Merwe, there's some questions around that, but I don't think he's the same liability. I don't think he is the turning circle of a sort of a tanker in the way that Visser tended to have. So, I think he's a little bit more robust than Visser is, and there's a lot to be excited about.
I think he's probably more coachable, and that's not to damn Tim Visser in any way, but he's you hear what Richard Cockerell's had to say about him, that he has developed his game since he's come to Edinburgh, and he's talked about how Duhan van der Merwe said how grateful he is for the work Edinburgh have put in on him as well, but he seems coachable, that he's open to learning, which is a positive, because players aren't always open to that and just think, I'm going to turn up and do my thing. And I think one of the reasons Visser kind of Visser retired, didn't he, when Townsend said, I'm going to take you to the US, but I see you more as a fullback. And Visser, I think pretty much at that point it was no, that's it. Thank you very much. Goodbye. So I think you're right. I think that there's a comparison there, but I think they potentially longer term that they could turn out to be very different players for Scotland.
Yeah.
The other one, I mean, just at the back three, the other one is Blair Kinghorn, because I thought Kinghorn had an all right game. If you're not comparing him to Hogg and you see him as a different player, he had an all right game. He probably one of his better games from fullback. There were a couple of times when he could have passed and didn't, but I thought he did okay, John. I'm not saying he didn't set the heather alight, but he wasn't as terrible as some people have suggested he was.
Yeah, I mean, I'll try and put this as nicely as possible. If you played the game on a piece of paper, Blair Kinghorn would be in your team every single day of the week, because he does all the stats really well from fullback. He does all the right things, except when he doesn't do the right things, and it happens every game without fail. And he didn't have a bad game, but the worldy try that he scores at the end doesn't make up for the 3 or 4 that were left out there because he chose to go himself when he had men outside. Now, that's fine. You know what? See, if you're a 6'5" fullback with pace like a raging horse, back yourself, go and run through your man and go and score the try, and nobody will say a word about it. Everybody will be like, Blair Kinghorn is the best thing since sliced bread. But see if you don't score, that's when there's issues, and we're not scoring. Kinghorn's not scoring. He's not beating the man, and we're leaving points out there because of it. And it's the same at club level. He's doing the same things. So I take all the points that he's, statistically a very good fullback, beats men, covers meters, etc., etc. And I'm not comparing him to Hogg. Hogg's a very different player. But if you just cut out that almost selfish streak and just played the man in, just make the pass, take the assist, brilliant.
But he can't pass, John. That's his problem. Seriously, he can't pass a rugby ball, right? So he has all the physical stats. But you only have to go and look back at the Ireland game 2 or 3 years ago, where he single-handedly butchered 2 or 3 chances by his inability to make a 5-yard pass. He's a very, very good club player, in my opinion. But I'm really unconvinced at international level. However, again, a wee bit maybe like the Hastings situation. I mean, he's still. I actually don't know how old he is.
23. He's got
he's
over
not.
100
He's not
games.
old. So he's got. He's got time to learn.
Yep.
He's always going to play second fiddle to the person who's in his position at international level. For the next 4 or 5 years at least. Yep. So he's got time to grow into the role. But I don't know. I think there's quite a lot of development he needs to do. I think he can play the wing as well, right? And he has had some pretty decent games. You think about he got a hat-trick against Italy last year.
Yeah.
And I think that was off the wing. So he does have something to bring, but his distribution is a really big issue. And I would love to see Edinburgh and Cockerell really work on that distribution, because otherwise, if he can't get that right, your problem is everyone will know he's only ever running into contact because he can't do anything else.
It's really concerning though, because didn't he used to play 10? And wasn't he an option?
So he is an option. Yeah, he played 10 against. He end up playing 10 against the USA with that game that we lost with his final kick of the game.
That is peak Scotland, isn't it?
So I think he is viewed as an option at 10. I don't think
that
Edinburgh
10 that can't make a 5-yard pass.
Jeez. That's like that's 2000 Scotland.
Yeah, he's in the wrong era.
Yeah, but he was like Jim Baxter for his try, with the keepy uppy just before getting in. It was beautiful. Wembley 67. Fair play to him, but unfortunately it's the wrong sport.
Yeah.
We will talk about the forwards in a moment. There's not really much to pick out there, but I just wanted to very quickly talk about the centres, because there's been a bit of chat about Hugh Jones today, and we've had a comment from Limbo191 on Twitch. It's not.
Is this our first real Twitch comment?
It's a second real Twitch comment. It wasn't a sex bot. So this is exciting. So thank you very much, Limbo, for joining us on Twitch. He says, Hugh Jones is hard done by not to get picked for Georgia. He looks better than he has done for a while. Now, there was a bit of debate on Twitter today when the Thistle podcast posted a thing saying, why haven't we looked at Hugh Jones at 12? And I think, and they made a reasonable point that, that Wales game that everybody talks about where we got absolutely houked, and that was, Jones at 12 and Harris at 13. He made 11 of his 11 tackles that day. So defensively, he was fine. I think the problem is that he had a massive drop in form after that.
Yep.
Probably partly because of that game and how badly it went. There was also then the Dave Rennie regime at Glasgow, which didn't do a lot of players any favours, and I think Hugh Jones is one of them. So I don't necessarily think it was that game that put him off. I think he said himself he doesn't see himself as a 12. I don't really understand what the difference between a 12 or a 13 is necessarily, other than where you stand, or that you might end up passing the ball a bit more at 12 than you would do at 13.
I think defensively it's more exposed at 12, in my view.
And I think from game plan perspective for Scotland, again, we still rely on our 12 to carry quite heavily into heavy traffic, whereas your 13 gets space on the outside man. Whereas Hugh Jones he's a big lumpy lad, but he's not a crash ball and a week of Sundays really. You want him kind of outside on that weak shoulder, starting to cut those lines in the kind of inside the 12-13 channel, maybe in 13-14 channel. But yeah, you don't want him. He's kind of wasted as a strike runner, just boshing it up and getting smashed by back rows all day.
Yeah, is there an option? I suppose when we get past the Wales, he's not going to come in for the Wales game. Let's face it. But during this autumn series, that he comes into the bench as an option at 15 and 13 just to see how he goes, I suppose, because if he's added that versatility to his game, all of a sudden he's an option from the bench, whereas before he wasn't, because he was only an option at 13, and you need that versatility off the bench. And I suppose we're talking about Blair Kinghorn and his maybe deficiencies. Is that an option during the autumn series, maybe against an Italy?
I think. I was going to say, I think we need to pick and choose where you put him in. Maybe Italy would be where you would want to see how that runs if you're prepared to take the risk. It would be good to have another option at 15 because you see, Kinghorn's, as we've discussed, is a has a bit of development still needed to be done. Like you though, I do worry about centre, to be honest with you. So I think Harris is baked in at 13 now, right? I think Townsend likes him, and I've always been a Harris critic, but you can see what he brings to the side. But he's not particularly flashy and sexy going forward. But then Scotland don't really use their centres as breakaway runners from an offensive perspective. They use them as much as decoys to unleash the back three rather than to try and pull men in. 12 though, and I think Sam Johnson, he's injured, right? So I don't know.
He's back at the weekend.
Is he back? Right. Okay.
Back so weekend, yeah.
I would have liked to have seen Hugh Jones. It's disappointing he doesn't see himself fitting into a 12 because I think he could. I maybe just slightly disagree, John. I do think he could do a job in there. Is it his natural position? Possibly not, but we are pretty bereft for options. James Lang, nothing against him. I don't think he did anything particularly wrong, but I don't think he did very much. He was tapioca where we needed a cornetto. Against Georgia, there wasn't an awful lot. It was pretty bland, right? I think we wanted a little bit more frisson and excitement. It tells you a lot about me, but I think a cornetto is.
I would really like a cornetto right now. I'm now buzzing. I was saying to somebody the other day, they were asking me to describe this podcast for a thing they were doing in work, and I was like, "There's some rugby chat. There's a lot of random chat about snacks. We talk a lot about snacks." So no, I wasn't for a cornetto.
I mean, in terms of the forwards, it was a good all-round performance. I don't think anybody necessarily stood out. I said in the group chat, and I saw, was it Ross McDonald on Facebook had posted something saying, is Scott Cummings actually our best lock now? You forget. I know Johnny Gray's on his, on good form at Exeter, but some of the stuff Scott Cummings did is stuff that Johnny Gray doesn't do, like holding up players in the tackle, carries well. His link play is good. I mean, he potentially is a bolter for the Lions if he can string a few games together.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think Cummings has been probably one of Glasgow's foreign players for 3 seasons now, and he has kind of flown under the radar a wee bit because he's again. I mean, it's the theme of this episode. He does the basics well, and he's not flashy. He gets through a power of work. He does all the defensive duties really well. He's great. He calls line outs. He does a little bit of everything. He seems to have added, his carrying game is really destructive now, and seems to have added. I mean, he's no Ben Tullis. Let's be honest. With
who is John? Who is
the rampaging giraffe that was Tullis? The absolute fear in his eyes, desperately looking for support. But Cummings he's running lines that you wouldn't necessarily expect your second rows to be running, and he's doing it at a hell of a pace, which is good to see. But he's a lovely big guy. He's a lovely big loon.
Nice to know, man. You've got a man crush there going, John. I think, by the sound.
Just a lovely
What's
big
not
boy.
to love?
Exactly. He's got those wee cheeks. He just lovely big boy.
I think sorry, Cam. I was just going to say. I think that it's a real conundrum going forward to next week, right? Because I thought Toulis had an absolute stormer. I thought Toulis was good. I thought Toulis was good. I know, but Toulis does this. Toulis then has these games where he looks really, really good. He was really secure at the line out. I thought he was really good in the loose. I think Toulis offers a lot, and I think going into the Wales game he will probably drop out to let Gray come in. But it's a bit harsh, actually. I think Toulis, he's always struggling because he's really a toss-up between Gray and Toulis, and very often he seems to find himself on the wrong side of that decision. But I thought he showed up really well against Georgia, and I think he offers a lot to Scotland shirt as well. Good balance for some of the other locks.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably a good starting place to look at who comes in for Wales, because you've got, I suppose, you've got Sam Skinner back as well, who can cover at lock and at back row. So presumably you would go Toulis out, Gray in next to Cummings, and then you've got Skinner on the bench for Harley as the natural lock cover. I mean, the 2 8s off the bench kind of experiment of Dupree and Haining, is fine against Georgia, but you're going to want something different. Do you think they bring somebody different? Would you make a change to the bench, maybe, John? I mean, your back row's maybe nailed on if Ferguson's fit.
Yeah, I mean, if Ferguson's fit, I think the front row stays the same, the back row probably stays the same, and then if you bring Skinner in, I wouldn't necessarily see a place for maybe Dupree or Haining.
Would you think about bringing in Blade Thompson into the bench? Partly because of his knowledge of the Welsh. He's played there now.
Yeah.
He will know a lot of those opposing players. Just a thought.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's small margins at this level, isn't it? So any sort of insight you can get, and I think obviously having him around the camp will be useful in the first instance. But yeah, there's an argument for that. In terms of other back rows, I don't know. It's a strange one because what other options do we have? Against Wales, you would probably be looking to rely on our kind of natural, probably our open sides, to kind of cause damage throughout the piece. But I'm kind of struggling to see who comes in. I think we should drop Dupree, but I don't know for who. But it's just, I don't know. There's maybe a bit of prejudice there against them.
Any changes for you in the backs then, Al? I mean, Johnson's fit again. He had an okay game, I think, against Ospreys despite Glasgow not doing particularly well.
One of the better Glasgow players.
I mean, I think that's the real chance. I mean, like, Hogg will come in, Russell will come in. I'm pretty certain Russell will come in. So then it does fall. I think everyone else will stay the same. I think 12, though, where's your toss-up at, right? I struggle to see. He might go Willang again. Because they looked reasonably solid, but as I say, very unflashy. Johnson would be your first pick if he's fit enough, right? Because he likes Johnson, and again, Johnson offers it more going forward. Is solid defensively, and he works well with Harris. I think actually that Harris Johnson piece, looks reasonable, but I think that's the challenge. But I think Hogg and Russell will obviously come back in. This is a kind of must-win game for Scotland. This is a massive opportunity. So, and Wales are there for the taking, in my opinion.
Yeah. Any other changes for you, John? I mean, Hogg comes in for Kinghorn. I mean, I don't think Kinghorn necessarily drops straight to the bench. Straight to the bench, though.
No, I don't think he necessarily does. I think we said early doors that we didn't necessarily see that Hugh Jones comes in to reckoning for this game, but if you're talking about 23, you could potentially find a space for him, maybe not, but I think Hogg will come in, Russell will come in. There's an argument for scrum half change. It's not going to happen, but there's maybe an argument that Price will start, but would Horn be a better option potentially? But yeah, I think probably Johnson will come in at 12 as well, and Harris for all of our. It shows how much opinion Tooney puts by what we say, because he clearly just doesn't give a hoot what we say, which is fine. That's why he gets the big bucks.
But Harris hasn't done an awful lot wrong in an international shirt in the last year. You look back even before the World Cup. He was actually one of our better performers at the World Cup.
He was, and he is. He's growing on me. And you know what? I see the place for him in this pragmatic Scotland. Part of me still longs to see a galloping Hugh Jones with his beautiful blonde hair bursting through Englishmen. But this pragmatic Scotland's probably not going to do that. And, fair enough. I think it was interesting that there was the interview with Finn Russell after the piece on Friday. And he was talking obviously about Duhan van der Merwe, and he was saying, he'd said to him, look, just that work rate, get on my inside. See if you're on my inside, I will put you in all day, mate. And he's basically just said, look, give me an option, this side of me, that side of me. And that's maybe where, if we can get more from Harris, because he is a big lad and he can be quite destructive.
Try, didn't he?
Yeah.
He got his try from running off that angle, and it's and against
if you've got those,
that comeback against England, that draw at Twickenham last year, Harris had a big role in that. Some of the dummy runners he was putting in off Finn Russell. He seems to enjoy playing off Finn Russell, and I don't know, like you said, John, it's that pragmatism that Scotland have developed since the World Cup, which isn't necessarily a bad thing.
No, it's not. No,
we talk about Cats at a Raven, as fun as that is, and as fun as it was to see, on Friday night. We want, I'd much rather Scotland won games than, I don't want to be Kevin Keegan's Newcastle Entertainers, losing thrilling 3-2 matches all the time. I'd much rather,
so a
9-3 win.
What you're saying is the podcast title tonight is, I would love it if we beat them. I would love it.
It's a way for Cammy to have a meltdown against somebody.
No, well, it's not Warren Gatland. It's only Wayne Pivac, and I'm not quite wound up by the Welsh this time yet.
Go, John.
I was just going to say, have you noticed that as well? Like, we are all desperate to beat Wales, let's be honest, but there's almost part of me that it's just a little bit less desperate because it's not Gatland anymore.
It's not the same. It's been debased. Any victory has been debased against Wales because it's not getting up Gatland. I'm going to be really torn if when the Lions come to play at Murrayfield. I'm going to have to dig out a Japan shirt. I should have bought one when I was there last year.
This was a conversation last week.
I struggle. What's that? Sorry, Cammy?
It's probably cheaper to buy a Japan shirt over here.
I can almost guarantee that would be the case.
I know someone got so they got the shirt for Mr. Laidlaw's new team, and they got it imported over to Scotland from there, and it was a ridiculous amount of money they paid for this shirt. And I mean, it's not even that nice a shirt.
That's like that brings back memories of searching for rare Radiohead releases in the in HMV with the Japanese labels because you'd get an extra B-side on it that you knew hadn't been released for a live recording.
Oh, the kids listening to this now do not know the pain, Cam.
I know they don't understand. It's probably the best opportunity we've had to beat Wales for a while, given our respective fortunes and given the fact it's at Parc y Scarlets against, with one man and his dog. Although knowing the Welsh press, there'll be at least one, a crowd cheering on. The way the Welsh press are with the rugby team. How do you think this is going to go, Al? I think it's going to be close.
Yeah, I'd love to say it would be an absolute, we'll hose them, but it's Scotland. We won't hose them. I think I said actually in our group chat, guys, and I think I said they're there for the taking. And I would be disappointed. I'll be actually disappointed. And not we always come into Six Nations going, well, this is our year. We're going to do it. Finally, we're going to live up to expectations. But if we can't go down and beat this Welsh side, then I think we are not where we think we are. We've not made the strides since the World Cup that we think we may have made. So this is a really, really big, important game for Scotland going into this one, because too often we've gone down there with the hope, and I think it's always been a bit hollow. But when you look at the solidity, you mentioned it earlier on, Cammy, that pragmatism that's been brought in since the World Cup. They've changed the defensive setup. They've changed the set piece setup by bringing in, I think it's De Villiers that's come in.
Yep.
They've done a really good job. You look at what they're doing around, in the tight. There's a feeling of robustness around this Scotland side and solidity that I don't think has been there. There isn't necessarily the same reliance on Hogg or on a Russell, which I think weirdly will actually see them play a bigger role because the whole weight is not on their shoulders to do something magical. I think there's enough solidity. I think, to be honest with you, our forwards, if they do their job, will win the game. I think if we beat them up front, beat them in the set piece, and we can pin them back, I struggle. I have very little fear of the Welsh backs. I don't think they're that amazing. I think they're decent, but we should have enough to be able to sort of contain them. And I think this is as good an opportunity as we've had probably in about 10, 15 years to go down there and get a result. And I think we need to grab it, kick on. We've got then the autumn internationals and then straight into the Six Nations. This is a big run of games for Scotland.
Yeah. Good. Right. We're going to move on now. We've got a wee jingle coming up. Here we go.
Well, we're low tie and we're low close and doggy bop on in the speedos, but I just want to know, did you see the legend that's Dougie Donnelly?
Yes, it's Where's Dougie Donnelly. It's the section of the podcast where we ask you to get in touch and tell us who you've seen out and about that may be loosely connected with the world of Scottish rugby. We've had one this week. I think we had two, but I'm unable to locate the other one for the moment. But this is Ross Elliott got in touch by email. So if you get in touch with us by email, you can drop me one at podcast@scottishrugbyblog.co.uk. Now, I need your help with this, guys, because potentially we've had a Where's Dougie Donnelly that has breached current COVID guidance.
Oh.
Do we name and shame?
If this is
Hint to it is.
If this is the one that I think it is, I think there's a fair. I think coming from me, I think you need to actually name and shame. I think it's only fair.
Okay. Now, the current advice is that you don't travel outside your health board area if you live in Glasgow. That's my understanding. Ryan Wilson was spotted at St Abs, which is it's not near Glasgow, down by the harbour, which is a lovely harbour. It's also doubles as New Asgard, and anyone that's seen Avengers Endgame. So if you want to go there, they've got that now. St Abs twinned with New Asgard as you drive into St Abs. There's a lovely chip shop at one of the campsites just as you drive in. Does Batter Halloumi. But anyway, Ryan Wilson.
Did we become a travel blog?
Ross did suggest that he was there to sign for Berwick, which it would be a further breach of COVID guidance if he's crossed the border as well.
That's true, yeah.
Unless he's done it to watch the football in a pub.
It's not Blackpool, mate. It's not Blackpool. No, I don't know where to fit this in because I've got a spectacular crap call off for tonight. Spectacular crap call off.
Let's do it now. Let's fit it in now. Go on.
So friend of the pods, long time listener, long time viewer and Patreon, I believe, Alan McDonald, who has also been on a show with us, played Balderdash with us. Alan has called off tonight. He's not going to view tonight because, and I quote, Tuesday night is the night he spends kidding on he's an elf on the internet. Obviously, he then caveated this by saying he's playing Dungeons and Dragons online tonight. But yes, he told me that he is an elf tonight.
You could have encouraged him to do a mashup with the podcast. He could have come on here dressed up as an elf.
You joke, but me and Alan have long talked about the prospect of doing. I think we're going to probably at some point we'll do a Patreon on the Dungeons and rugby themed Dungeons and Dragons episode of the Patreon. I'm not going to do it as an actual real live episode like with Banderscotch, which someone described as a real low point for the podcast.
That was one of my favourite ever.
I love that. I really enjoyed doing that. Yeah,
I should say that I said to Alan that every word he had just said are my favourite words in the world right now. But I am going to have to call you out as a crap call off. So
Yeah, well, let's not
sorry,
kink
Alan.
shame here either. If he wants to go and be an elf, then that's fine.
No judge, no judge.
Right, we'll move on to the last section of the podcast.
Hands in the rock, who has got their hands in the rock? Hands in the rock, hands in the rock, who has got their hands in the rock?
Yes, it's Hands in the Ruck, the Any Other Business section of the podcast. We've had a couple in. I'm going to start with this from Matthew Riley on Twitter. Because we probably could have fitted this in elsewhere in the podcast, but it's the barbarian in the room, the barber in the room.
Or not in the room, as the case would have been.
Yeah. He said, the Barbar 12's apologists, no, they're not just going for a beer like anyone else could. They had undertaken to remain in a protective bubble to ensure that their sport could continue. That just cost like the RFU £1 million in revenue, even though there's no crowd, because the game had to be called off. For those that don't know, I've been under a rock. Sean Maitland, Tim Swinson, and 12 other Barbarian players, including Chris Robshaw and all the Saracens players who were in the squad, went out on the lash for 2 nights. I thought it was only one, but apparently it's 2 nights. One night they went for an Italian, another night they went for a pint. Despite the fact they were supposed to be holed up in a London hotel in a COVID-secure bubble so they could play England last weekend. So they breached the COVID-secure bubble. There was an interview with Tim Swinson on Rugby Pass where he was talking about the fact they'd been given a room filled with beer and games for them to play. So I don't understand, at what point someone went, do you know what, lads, this isn't good enough, plus the 5k match fee I'm getting.
I hadn't actually appreciated, obviously, I hadn't even thought about the fact that how much money this had cost, an already struggling RFU. So, I mean, really, I can just say, Agent Maitland and Agent Swinson, come in, your job is done. So, you have to play the long game. Now, I mean, look, it's boneheaded in the serious note. I mean, it's completely boneheaded. I mean, yeah, mind if I was stuck in a room with James Haskell and I had to play Connect 4, I'm pretty sure I would be making a bolt for freedom as well.
I don't think he was there.
I was not. I was. Who was Robshaw? Did you say it was there?
Chris Robshaw. Yeah. But he went out with them. They will probably try to ditch him.
Yeah, he's that mate that you tell you. We're definitely all staying in tonight, Chris. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We're not staying in. But he obviously, it's like Neville Longbottom and Harry Potter. He obviously spied them coming out of the common room and decided to tag along.
Yeah,
got
me into trouble.
The other bad thing for this as well is, you look at the players that all did it are all well played, highly paid professional rugby players. There were others in the squad who obviously didn't go out, and these are all the Pacific Island lads. Now, this is a real opportunity for them to go in and play on a big stage and put in a performance, looking at getting different contracts, making a bit of money. And it's not just the RFU who've been let down, it's the other players within the squad, including Vern. I mean, God, how could you can you imagine the face on Vern Cotter, who is head coach for the Barbarians, when those guys wandered back in from the Italian?
That must have been quite spectacular.
Yeah, that just that's you think Maitland and Swinson, having played under Cotter, would have known better than to have danced with fire in that way, right?
Maybe France has made him soft.
Maybe
he's gone vegetarian.
It's because he's gone to Fiji now, right? He's lounged about on the beach. He's
now. Right. It's no longer rabbits. It's like pure coconuts. He just snaps the coconut in half.
One interesting thing is how the Sean Maitland thing's been handled compared to Finn Russell earlier this year. Because the way it's talked, I mean, Ratu Tagui's been brought into the squad. And it said, winger Sean Maitland will not return to the squad this week and is therefore unavailable for selection. And then the quote down at the end of the press release that's on the SRU website says, Gregor Townsend said, we are working hard to ensure our training camp remains secure in terms of COVID protocols. And as such, Sean's actions last weekend with the Barbarians mean he won't be able to rejoin our group now, and we will review the situation in the coming weeks. Now, you could read that two ways. Either, look, he's done a bad thing and he's been a bit of a naughty boy, and so he's got to go away and think about what he's done. Or alternatively, he's breached the bubble, so we've got to wait to make sure that he's okay to come back in our bubble again. I mean, it's not... They've not damned him or criticised him in any way. But I was kind of thinking, to be fair, though, a lot of the Finn Russell situation was caused by the kind of briefing that went on behind the scenes from both camps that kind of escalated it. So maybe this is just to give them that credit. This is the SRU diffusing a situation and trying not to make
take the heat out of it, right? Why create a sushi? Why create focus? You're coming into the biggest game that we've had for a while. Again, every game's the biggest game we've had for a while, but it's a big game coming up. Why would you want to end up focusing on, one idiot in a position that actually, to be honest, he was probably going to be on the bench at best anyway, right?
Yes.
So he's not your star player. He's not your talisman.
It's interesting that the Saris boys all decided to go out on the lash, though. Given that was probably the last opportunity they would have to play a competitive game before the Lions tour.
Yeah, because the championship doesn't sound like it's going to return either.
Yeah. Or even if it does, I mean, it's not exactly going to be like competitive for them, is it? Really?
No. John, do you want to do your hands in the ruck while I search for the other one I've got on here?
I'm not sure I do, Cammy.
Go on, John. You probably,
I've mellowed from earlier on, but it's still got a slight bee in my bonnet about this. So, in our the new normal of COVID's madness and finances being absolutely battered, all ends up from everywhere. The SRU have taken a bit of a pasting from the everyman fan for their Nevis, the Richie Gray, as we called it, membership, and obviously asking for supporters to put their hands in their pockets, despite supporters getting their season ticket passes back. Now, what I'm okay with this. What I'm not okay with is the club game's continued paranoia regarding the SRU's intentions and certain elements of entitlement that come from certain parts of the club game, where they have a belief that because certain people are members of their clubs, they therefore should be handed Nevis memberships or handed this or handed that and given priority access to the no tickets that are going to be available. It again just strikes me as people are not reading the tone of the room, and they are not understanding that rugby is in a huge crisis just now. Financially, everything is very precarious. And the SRU would not be asking supporters to put their hand in their pocket for a made-up nonsense membership that will entitle them to nothing in the end up.
You get your name on the tunnel. You get your name in the tunnel.
That's true,
and
yeah.
a newsletter.
That is an opportunity for comedy that should not be looked past. That is true.
And you get a PDF match programme.
Fantastic. Now, I will have to upgrade my PDF reader to allow me to view that, but if I was entitled like some, I would ask the SRU to pay for that PDF upgrade. No, it strikes me as people need to be a bit more pragmatic about the situation we find ourselves in. The idea of asking for freebies or asking for preferential treatment in this world is bonkers, and it doesn't sit well with me.
Yeah, I think that the one thing I would say to slightly counter it is I think it's a shame that the SRU didn't allow clubs to sell Nevis memberships.
And get the kickback. Absolutely.
For no other reason than getting a bit of a percentage.
Yeah.
That's the only reason I think it would have been worth to do it, even if it was, you get £5 for every Nevis membership you sell back to the club.
Fantastic.
I think that's fine. I agree with you though. And I think as well that there was Nix Johnson, who we've had on the podcast before. She's got a dad's debentures, and I can kind of understand from the point of view of a debentures holder that you have paid money up front, not for tickets, just for access to tickets, to first refusal, and you gave a lot of money to fund, to build Murrayfield effectively at one point, the debenture holders. So I do take their point that they have financially put up their own money, and they're not being given any earlier access to Lions tickets, for example, than anybody else. So I think I think you're absolutely right, John. There is an entitlement there that's frustrating. I think there are things around the edges that probably could have been done better, but I think overall the money raising. And I think that the other thing, I think couple of the comments. Every time it comes around to, they're trying to create the Scottish Rugby Corporation, and it's just, it's not possible because the clubs own the SRU. I mean, what by creating the corporation, it's the kind of, it's the private company arm of the SRU. It's still part of the SRU. The president still sits on the Scottish Rugby PLC and makes decisions. The president is still elected by the clubs. So yes, these things are set up, and yes, everyone gets, as soon as the word PLC or the letters PLC come up or corporation, people panic and think all of a sudden they're going to steal rugby away in the night and sell it to private equity. They can't do it. You read the Constitution. They have to disband. To do that, they have to disband the Scottish Rugby Union. They have to dispose of all assets, including Murrayfield. So you'd be starting from a base level of nothing and not even having a ground to play at.
I mean, I think the bit that really sticks out for me in this, and I was thinking about it after seeing, reading some stuff today about this, and I was, we're complaining here. You've got people who, and I get the point to a degree, but you only have to look at what other sports are doing to keep their sports afloat and to keep their clubs afloat, for example. And I'll draw a direct comparison and look at Scottish football, for example, right? And I know this is not a football podcast, but most clubs, when the season was mothballed, offered their fans the opportunity to get their season ticket holders to get the refund on the unspent part of the season ticket. And for the vast majority of clubs, the vast majority of fans did not take that up. Not only that, fans have poured millions of pounds back into those clubs by buying season tickets for a season that they knew fine well they were very unlikely to get in. And we have fans in rugby, and rugby fans make a play, or some rugby fans make a play about how rugby has this great ethos and is better than football in some way, and their fans are better than football fans in some ways. And we've all heard certain rugby fans and a certain type of rugby fan trot this out. But you look at football, and I'm not talking Rangers and Celtic here. You look at smaller clubs and what the fans have poured in, from Premier League sides down to second division sides and probably lower that Highland League, Lowland League. Those clubs people have put in money and put in £400-500 in some of those cases for something they will never see, purely because they love their club, they love their sport, and they want to see it stay afloat. And it sticks in the craw of them, and you've got people going, "Why am I not getting something for free?"
Yeah.
And I think you have to take the context that we're in, and we should compare ourselves sometimes to other sports and realize that, we could be doing more actually as a group of fans. It works both ways.
Yeah. And I think, it is probably going to be telling when we get out the other end of this. The clubs that have a community around them and have done the hard work up front to build a community and to ingrain themselves within that community will survive this, because they will have people who will want to see them through and want to support them through that. I think you look at, I can give the example of Berwick. They raised 20 grand because they got local farmers to give them a bucket of grain. So they took a truck round, bucket of grain, raised 20 grand. So that's them covered for this. That's them covered for this year in terms of the losses. But that's only because they put the hard work up front, working, those farmers wanted to do that because they're so closely associated with the club. And there'll be other clubs who've built those community links who are able to go out and say, look, we're in need of help, and the community will gather around. There'll be other clubs who haven't done that, who've just, paid players to come and play for them in the past, haven't got no youth set up, and all of a sudden they're having to close the doors because they can't open the bar on a Saturday night, but they've got nothing else to kind of sell them to people on. So yeah, I think you're right, John. People expecting something for free in a time like this is disappointing.
Yep.
I think the option of going in for early tickets, I think I can see why they offered it, but I think any realist is going to realize it's not really. I was never on the cards.
We are not in a position where we are at all, or even kid on to be experts in any of this stuff, and yet we were sitting here saying months ago it's not going to happen. So I get that people were holding on to hope and really thinking, it'd be great to get back into the stadiums, and we had the test events and things like that. But the reality was always, the reality of the situation was always against us here. and just a bit of pragmatism, please. I'm loving the comments.
You feel better for that, John?
Do you know what? I feel a wee bit soothed. I think it was a much more eloquent version, I thought, there of my hands in the ruck than perhaps I had shared earlier on today.
Alan, I need to get details of who Beric sold the grain to. So, what's your hands in the ruck while I desperately I want to make sure I get that. I want to make sure I get the grain company right.
Well, actually, I've been quite sanguine this last couple of weeks on a rugby front. So I was struggling today, but actually, John's kind of touched on it there. So you've segued nicely, John, for me.
There you go.
So it's almost as if we planned this, and actually we haven't planned it, in fairness, which may come as a surprise to our listeners and viewers. I saw today that the Scottish Government are planning to have meetings with our football colleagues to get fans back in. So we've run test events. And actually what was really good is, previously the SRU were front and centre of some of the push to get some fans back into stadiums. And they did a very successful test event, obviously, back, a couple of months ago. I really hope the Scottish Rugby is at that meeting or is having similar conversations, because, I think we all understand the concerns that are going on, in particular in certain parts of the country, in Scotland, with COVID. And I think we're all sensitive to those. But I think most fans would probably understand that these are open air stadiums. There is a way of doing this safely. We have proven this. I don't think any fan's expecting 60,000 back in Murrayfield next week. But is there any reason why you couldn't have 1,000, 2,000 and push those numbers up? Murrayfield, for example, city centre, you could limit to who you sell tickets to people within the immediate postcode area and still get 2,000 people in there easily. So you have people walk-ups. You've got space to be doing parking. You don't need to be flooding people onto public transport. I do think there's a requirement for us to try and do stuff to get money into and again, for rugby, that is money coming into the game. That's money that's not there today coming back into the game, right? That is needed. Right. So I hope, and I'm sure they are, because SRU have been front and centre in this, but I'd like to see more about us pushing to try and get some more of these test events back in. I think it's really important going forward, because we're going to be living with this. And if we're going to be, in this situation through till, Easter and beyond, we have to have some supporters in the stadium. I think the game is otherwise going to really, really suffer. Yeah. And it's a really important link, for mental health and all these things that we've been discussed in multiple other forums. And I think there is a softening at government. I think they're more open to the conversations. I just have to hope, because I think there is a way of doing it. If you can go to a cinema, or if you can, in many parts of Scotland still go to cinema, you can still go out for a meal in an enclosed space in many parts of the country. I see no reason why you can't go and sit 2 meters apart from the next person to you in an outdoor stadium that you're walking to.
Yeah, and I think Murrayfield particularly lends itself to that because of the way it's laid out, because of the fact you've got it within the compound. So the turnstiles aren't to get into the stadium, it's to get into the area within the stadium. It's a big stadium. You could easily get people in there socially distanced. Yeah. That would probably mean that you might have to have Glasgow home games there, John, which I know it wouldn't go down well with Glasgow fans, but I'm not necessarily sure that Scotstoun's got the same setup. We were talking about traffic problems. We spent half an hour talking about planning and traffic problems in Scotstoun before, but Murrayfield, unfortunately, probably lends itself more to that.
Yeah, I mean, the only concern would be then you're potentially starting to, you're probably then saying you have to drive over and you have to, there's arguments. It's all kind of weighing up the balance, isn't it? But I think someone done a kind of a rough, back of the flag packet analysis of how many people you could fit into Scotstoun in a 2 meter, circle and stuff like that, and it was stupid numbers. You get more people in the gym on a busy evening or next door than you would in the stands. So it's not ideal, and I think again that's it. Glasgow fans have been very vocal that we want to be playing games at Scotstoun because that's our home. But if there was the opportunity to see Glasgow playing, I'm sure people would maybe accept that. Some might not. Some might be grumpy, and those people might well be on a podcast to voice those opinions at some point. But I think for the most part, everybody's going to have to be a bit more flexible regarding that. I think the issue comes when that choice gets made from let's say a wider commercial decision to support an all-day event that goes against the sporting integrity of the Pro 14. If it's done for COVID reasons, I'm sure people will be more sympathetic to it.
Yeah. As McCreath, Simpson and Prentice, so is Simpson's Malt, Martin Bell, who asked that question a while ago, who have helped collect. They're selling the grain on Berwick's behalf, and they've donated 115 tonne themselves towards that, and they're also the shirt sponsor for Berwick as well. So we're not getting any kickback from Simpson's Malt for this, boys. No free grain.
They are not our upcoming partner.
No. Let me talk to you about wheat.
Yeah. Where do you get your grain supply?
Yeah. We had one. We did have one on Facebook on our super secret Patreon page that you can get membership to if you sign up to the Patreon, which was Martin Bell, who said Richard Cockerell's inexplicable reluctance to give Nathan Neville Chamberlain game time for Edinburgh when the club only has one other 10 who may be absent for the national team. I mean, that's crazy.
We've talked about this a couple of times now. We even mentioned it last week about maybe trying to give him a run at 15 to just get him some game time. I just don't understand it. Cockerell is playing with fire. Maybe he sees Kinghorn as a 10.
I mean, there was a suggestion. I mean, I think it's the offside line. David Barnes was right in that actually this is a real test for Richard Cockerell on that, because he's really under pressure in terms of the players he's got available. He's having to give the youngsters game time. And before he's been able to say, oh, well, they're just not good enough. I mean, they've got to be good enough because they need to step up now. So this is where he earns his cash, Al.
Yeah, no, I mean, it is. I mean, he's getting paid to go out and get results with the players that he has at his disposal. And if that's not his A team, but then, a lot of other teams, the rest of the Pro 14 pretty much are fighting without their A teams either, right? So, everyone's got international call-offs. You've got to make a purse out of a pig's ear, right? Or sow's ear, whatever the phrase is. The people will know better than I do, obviously. So I do. I think it's a real challenge for him. I mean, he's done a great job so far at Edinburgh, and he's been sort of lauded for all the work that he's done. But time to
it's a real benefit there as well, though, because he's got Henry Pyrgos available. You drop Henry Pyrgos in beside a rookie 10. And let Pyrgos just coach him through. Pyrgos is a great game manager. He's got all the experience in the world. Let him coach this young lad through the game. When are you going to give him exposure, if not now? Are we going to do the same? What was the rugby league lad that was signed as the next great Scottish 10 and then just didn't get game time at Edinburgh and went off back to rugby league because he preferred to play rugby league? Nobody's ever said they prefer to play rugby league.
The interesting thing with him is there was an interview came out with Alan Tate afterwards where he said he was treated abysmally during time, stuck in a flat and left to it, and he's gone. He's playing pretty well for these Rhinos right now, that lad. So
he looked for all intent. He had all the raw materials. Yeah, okay. Guys are coming from a different code, but the ball's still the same shape, and there's plenty of transferable skills, as we've seen with many converts. And he looked like he had the goods to be a decent player, but again, just didn't get a shot.
Yeah. My hands on the ruck is the commentator for Scotland and Georgia, who is Simon Ward. Now, I got excited because someone told me that he was Michael McIntyre's father-in-law, which would have made a lot of sense, but it wasn't. It's an actor with the same name who's now dead. So it was I think probably the worst commentary I've ever heard of a game of rugby. It sounded like a man who liked real ale telling you about his homebrew and then giving you directions of how to get to the supermarket. He just never stopped talking the whole game, and some of the stuff I couldn't even tell you what he was talking about half the time.
Do you know, I watched that entire game, and I must have blanked it out completely. I hadn't even thought about it until you mentioned it there, Cammy, which I think goes to tell you everything, because it must have added absolutely zero value to the watching experience.
So bad.
I mean,
I thought
yeah,
I thought there was an opportunity for us to maybe broaden our international appeal and get the American commentators in.
they were
How-
fantastic. That's still,
how
that
good
video
would
is
that
still
been?
up. That video of that game in Houston or wherever it was.
Houston,
Is still,
yeah. Oh,
he's going for the end zone.
and he's
Oh, yeah,
hitting the field goal here.
Simon Ward kind of talking about, I don't know where he parked his car, I think, at one point. Honestly, it was just like, you're expecting you to start giving you directions. You want to go to the end of the road and then you'll see a tree and you'll think to myself, that's a funny looking tree. And you want to turn right now. No, I had a picnic in the field over the back of that tree in 1979. Honestly, it was stuff like that. And I was just like, he'd obviously done his research and just wanted to get it all out during the game. But it was really dull.
It was
so-
on ITV4 though, so we've got to
know.
I'm surprised anyone was watching, Cam.
I know. Well, we're available. Look, we're available. ITV4.
Oh, how good would that be?
Yeah, sort of they do this. It's like this sort of thing they do on Sky, right? You know, where they get sort of
Put the
fans doing
fans
the
watching.
commentary. They should get us doing the commentary for Scotland games.
Some of the stuff I was texting during one of the group chats. One of the group chats I texted, probably not suitable for commentary. So
Yes, that would be a surefire way to ensure that
You'd have to make all Scotland games post Watershed.
yeah.
and we would be Zuckerberged before we knew it.
Yeah. Again, we never found out what happened there.
Yeah,
knows?
I know. Dean's fault.
Anyway, that's it for this week. We will be back next week with some sort of post-match analysis of the Wales game, hopefully for good. Daft Craig has jumped in on Twitch today. The commentator was hired solely on his ability to pronounce the Georgian names. To be honest, Daft Craig, I'm not even sure that he could do that either.
Scott Hastings did defer to him at one point and said, yes, so some of those Georgian players, such as, and then the boy jumped in and it was like, that's Hastings. Hastings was bad as well, though, to be fair. He was talking some amount
he's
of
working.
minutes.
The thing is, you think, I know, but I think he was working with that, though. You're working with a man.
True, but
as dull as that, and you've got and the questions he was asking him were rubbish.
Yeah,
you know, it's like,
working on
how do you think the game's going, Scott? Or he asked him at one point. He said, "He's your nephew, Adam Hastings. He's your nephew." You know, and just start. You know, how do you think he's come on? And I was like, this is just an asinine, horrible question to ask his uncle.
Awful thing. He's actually playing terrible tonight. He's
I know.
And I dislike him. I'm taking the Andy Farrell approach to Bam.
It's like the commentary version of being a 10 and being stuck out a 9 who's having an absolute rot.
Yeah. I think that's exactly what happened. So we were halfway through a goodbye anyway. You can catch us next week on the podcast. Keep an eye on the blog, scottishrugbyblog.co.uk, for match reports and player ratings and the like. But for now, it is goodbye from me and goodbye from John and Al.
Goodbye.
Bye, all.